Hello gamers, today we're going to be taking a look at a build that I was very excited about pre-Renegades, and that is Support Strand Warlock. This build is capable of quite a lot of things, all happening at the same time, which we will discuss when we talk about gameplay. But first, we're going to talk about the setup as we usually do, and I apologize ahead of time. I got quite a lot to yap about because there's many things that you can do with this setup. So, exotic-wise, what are we using? We are using two Renegades exotics. These are brand new with Renegades. Service of Luzaku, which comes from the Season Pass, and Daimos Effusion, which comes from beating the campaign on your Warlock, the Renegades campaign. These exotics have very little to do with each other, but when combined, you'll see the vision. Daimos Effusion. When you have a Strand super equipped, so you can use it on Prismatic, casting your Rift will suspend nearby combatants. That suspend deals damage over time to them, which does heal you at the same time. Anything that breaks free from suspension suffers more damage, and then killing suspended targets also heals you a little bit. And then Service of Luzaku is a support frame machine gun, where when you get kills, you spawn a threadling nest, and these nests spawn threadlings. And it has about an internal cooldown of about 10-15 seconds. But also hitting targets with this weapon builds that healing charge, which you can use to heal the threadling nest, which spawns more threadlings, or you can heal your teammates. Rapid healing increases weapon damage and spawns threadlings from your allies. So this is all about dealing a bunch of damage, spawning a bunch of threadling nests, and then using that healing energy that you've generated to heal your teammates, to heal those nests, to let the threadlings kind of just do all the work for you. Although you should be using this both offensively and defensively, because this also refills the weapons magazine from reserves, so you don't even need to reload this thing. Although healing the threadling nests doesn't use any ammo, so that's also really nice. So you don't have to worry about wasting your ammo to heal. So now we're going to talk about aspects, fragments. We're going to see how all of this comes together. First, we are using Weaver's Call. This should hopefully be somewhat self-explanatory. You should be using your class ability quite a lot with the helm, and this is just going to throw out some more threadlings, suspends, threadlings. You're just throwing everything out there. And then I like using the Wanderer because we're going to be generating quite a lot of tangles, especially with the catalyst for Service of Luzaku, which I don't even think I mentioned, where nests can mature over time as you heal them. So if you keep them alive long enough, you can go walk over to a nest and just pluck a tangle from the nest and use that. So you should have a good amount of tangles, and I wanted to have multiple forms of suspension possible for this setup. I didn't want to just rely on my class ability, even though you will have your class ability very often. Now, something I will say is that a slight weakness of this build is the fact that you can be somewhat fragile. So if you did want to run with Weave Walk to be able to like move in and out of danger, I would understand. But personally, I think part of the build is like learning how fragile you are and putting yourself in situations where you're not going to instantly explode or anything like that. So I like the Wanderer, but if you want to flex this out for something else, I think you can. Grenade, we're just running with Threadling Grenade. And then I was experimenting with Empowering Rift. I do like it in maybe some lower intensity pieces of gameplay where you don't need that healing so much. But I did find myself in some of the upper end of pieces of content that I was just liking the healing a little more than having the Empowering Rift. Although with Thread of Warding, if you're diligent enough about picking up Orbs of Power, then maybe you can start to experiment with Empowering Rift, because they've made Empowering Rift really good now. It's really good. So if you can use Empowering Rift, I would encourage its use. Fragments are not going to blow your mind at all. Defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. This is a staple. You have two things that revolve around using your class ability, Weaver's Call, and your exotic helmet. This is a staple, non-negotiable. Throw this on. I went with Thread of Wisdom. Defeating suspended targets creates an Orb of Power. This is not only to fuel or help fuel Thread of Warding for Woven Mail, but we're support, right? We're playing support. Let's do more supporty things for our teammates. Generating tons of Orbs of Power for your teammates is one of the most support things that you could possibly do. So I'm rocking with Thread of Wisdom. And then Thread of Evolution, your threadlings are doing more damage. Anytime you're doing any kind of threadling, anything, you gotta basically have this thing in, and it's giving you some free super stat as well. And then Thread of Warding, picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. The biggest weakness of this build, if you are not running Thread of Warding, is that you are going to die. You are so fragile. I know you have a lot of healing, with Daimos Effusion and all the suspends and stuff like that, but if you can't get yourself in a position to do those suspends in the first place because the enemies hit so hard, then it doesn't really matter how much healing you have if you can't ever utilize it. So I've really liked Thread of Warding for some of the upper tier pieces of content that you got to start doing. Lawless Frontiers, maybe you're doing GMs, stuff like that. Staying alive, you can't support your teammates if you're not alive, right? So I have really liked Thread of Warding. If you did want to flex in a couple of other things, maybe you're doing something a little less intense, you could do Generation. I think it's a little boring, but you could totally do it. You also have Thread of Isolation for some even more support. Severing Burst from the target. Sever is incredibly strong. So if you do, maybe you're not like feeling the orbs or like you got enough orbs of power, you can flex that out for something else, right? It just kind of depends on what piece of content you're doing, who your teammates are, etc., etc. But this as like a very general safe build, I think is a good starting point. The artifact has like basically nothing, but I was experimenting with something in particular, Void Infestation and Power from Pain. Devour is very good, and if we can get Devour on this build, that's awesome. So rapid final blows against weakened combatants grant you Devour. How do we weaken targets? We got Void Infestation. Defeating a weakened target spreads the tracking projectile that weakens other targets. And we are doing our base weaken from High Tyrant, which is from the new dungeon, with Withering Gaze, which could also be like part of your support setup. Like just being able to have weaken on a high priority target on a moment's notice is incredibly good. However, how you would think this would work, and I'm going to show a clip of me in the shooting range here, is that you charge this up, you weaken a target, then the projectile spreads it to another target, and then spreads it to another target, and then boom, you have Devour, right? You get your 3 kills, you're done. And in the shooting range, it's like, yeah, that's super easy. Like, why would you not run this? Like, it seems like the easiest thing. The problem is that in practice, this is much more difficult to make happen than you would normally think. I ended up spending so much time trying to trigger Devour with this particular combo that I wasn't using the rest of my build. Like most of my time in like a solo ops piece of content was spent trying to get this to trigger, because sometimes the projectile will miss. Sometimes it'll go to a target that has a bit more health. Sometimes you're not getting those kills rapidly enough. So I was just so distracted with trying to get Devour that I didn't end up playing with the rest of the build, and most of my time was just spent trying to trigger Devour. And so if you're running with people who are weakening a lot more targets, or maybe you have a little more self-control, or like you're in a better situation to make it happen, you could run this. But otherwise, I do like Withering Gaze as a support option, but it wasn't as smooth. Like if you can get it to trigger, then you can just keep Devour rolling basically forever until you run out of enemies. But getting that initial trigger was a lot tougher than I originally thought it was going to be. So don't pressure yourself too much to try to do something like this. But if you can make it happen, it's very, very strong. I'm not running with a sword, so you can get rid of a lot of sword stuff, throwing counter energy. You could do armor smith. We're not doing a lot of arc damage, anything. So you're basically taking stuff that fits in your build, in your kit, which is not going to be a ton of things. You can run with the sniper, as we'll discuss. So I would probably throw in Sniper's Meditation, reload at range, stuff like that. But don't worry about the artifact otherwise too much. Next, let's talk about some weapons that I think you might want to be using. I really like High Tyrant from the dungeon. I think this weapon is very, very good, although you're not stapled to it at all. In terms of strand weapons, obviously, if you have a Mint Retrograde, that's going to be very, very high up on the list. I've been using Lance Ephemeral for some anti-champion capabilities with Anti-Barrier Sniper. With this particular setup, you have Anti-Barrier with a Sniper, you have Overload with a Pulse, and then your Suspends are going to be your Anti-Unstop. So this is really a lot of support. You have full anti-champion, you're healing people, you're doing tons of threadlings. So this is a nice setup for this particular season with this artifact. If you're watching this outside of Renegade season, then you're going to have to change around your weapons a little bit. We do also have anti-barrier hand cannon, and Unloved is a very, very good hand cannon if you wanted to rotate that in with a different special weapon. Maybe you want to run a PSI Eterna, so you still have anti-barrier, you still have anti-overload, and you still have unstoppable capabilities as well, although I probably wouldn't be running with Well, I mean, you could run a jolting feedback. It's fine. So those are some of the options. All or Nothing is also a new weapon, and you can get Accelerated Assault with it, which we have shown is a very, very good perk. Just make sure you're maximizing some of the dynamic heat reloads. As we discussed in a previous video, this also has Slice, it has Tear, it has Hatchling, a lot of Strand perks built into this weapon as well. Stats-wise, I've decided to stack the box with Grenade, with Super, and with Class Stat. Class, we just want our class ability as often as possible. If you want to get for that Overshield, I think that's totally fine. Super, Needle Storm is very, very good. It's also generating Threadlings, so, you know, I like to have a higher Super stat. And then Grenade, you could maybe go a little bit less on the Grenade if you wanted to throw into melee a little bit. I really use my melee too much. I kind of use it as a finisher, a long-range finisher. So I was trying to max out my Grenade stat to just really have those Threadlings do a ton of damage. And then a little bit on our weapon stat. If you wanted to go higher weapons as well, because you're using Surface of Luzaku quite a lot, you're using Mint Retrograde quite a lot, your entire kit is not fully based on Threadlings, but it is a good amount. You can make these adjustments as you see fit. I've been enjoying this particular setup, so I'm not in a huge hurry to change things up too much. But if you really like melee a bit more and you can go without some Grenade stat, make the change. If you want more weapons, make the change. Finally, our mods are pretty much based on just maximizing Surface of Luzaku and our grenades. So we have Harmonic Siphon here to generate Orbs of Power. We want more heavy ammo. Dynamo, we are using our class ability quite a lot, even though I haven't heard the greatest things about Dynamo recently. More super energy is never a bad thing. We have some grenade fonts to max out our grenade stat. I'm going with no reload mod here because you should be automatically reloading your Surface of Luzaku by healing people, and then if you have a Mint Retrograde with rewind rounds, you don't need to reload this thing either. So there's no need for a reload speed mod in your gloves. So I'm just going with a get ability energy when you use an ability type mod. If you want to filter down the grenade fonts, that's fine. If you want to get rid of the grenade fonts completely, that's also fine. Resistances, we got to have at least one melee damage resistance. You should be in close range a good amount of the time, and then just fill the rest out. I like a concussive dampener. We have Strand Weapon Surge, Harmonic Scavenger for some more ammo, Recuperation for a little bit of extra support in staying alive, and then Distribution, Time Dilation, Powerful Attraction in the class item. Nothing too revolutionary there. So I know there's a lot of yapping. I'm sorry. Let's get into some gameplay now, how the build works, how it doesn't work, and where you're going to have the most success. So how does the build work? Well, you have many options available to you most of the time, and the priority of those things just depends on the combat scenario. There's not really a rotation or an order of ability usage. It's more of a reactive than a proactive setup, although you could view Surface of Luzaku as both reactive and proactive given what it does. That being said, you have two main things to do. Heal teammates and your nests with Luzaku, and then look for big suspend rifts. And while this seems like not that many things, once you get into the heat of battle, you will realize that you have many buttons to push and many things to keep track of. Those big suspending rifts will restore your class ability much faster than you realize. Those threadling nests will run out of time much faster than you realize. Your teammates will be dying much faster than you realize. So there is a lot of stuff to potentially keep track of. This build really excels in the most modern of gameplay scenarios. Your battlegrounds, your lawless frontiers, stuff that is much more enemy dense, but also usually takes place in some kind of an arena where you can hunker down, establish some nests, and be able to spam threadlings everywhere. And even then, there will be, plenty of times where nests spawn in unreasonable to maintain positions, so you just gotta let those go and try to get new ones down. Lawless Frontiers is amazing for this build because of the target-rich environment, but also because people take enough damage for healing to actually be worth it, and because of the reduced healing capabilities thanks to non-regenerating health. I know that the effects of healing are reduced in something like Lawless Frontiers, but even with that, the amount of healing that you can dump into a teammate to bring them back to full, and so they don't have to worry about their health for a very long time, is a lot. You can restore a ton of health On top of that, you should hopefully be generating tons of orbs of power for yourself to use Thread of Warding to give Woven Mail to yourself. That's enabling you to do those big suspending rifts, going back and forth. You're throwing tangles, creating more suspensions, all that kind of stuff. And so there's just a lot of activities. It's very high APM that you can do with this build. And for some people, that is a lot of fun. For me, it's a lot of fun. I like having a ton of options. I like having the ability to do many different things all at once. But for some other people, this might be a bit much. We talked about a hunter build in the previous season that was like, this is the best hunter build in the game. And I don't know if I recommend it because there are so many buttons to push compared to Lucky Raspberry, right? We did a Lucky Raspberry build. That one is very self-explanatory, and some people want a simpler experience. So if you do want a simpler experience, this one can be a bit much, and you might want to just focus on one aspect of it. Maybe you take off Daimos Fusion and you go full threadlings with it, or you go even more support with the healing, all that kind of stuff. It just depends on how much you are willing to tolerate and how many buttons you are looking to push. Outside of Lawless Frontiers, obviously you can die a lot faster because you don't have that same health status, but being able to heal people when they're in danger is very, very good. I really like this build in Battleground type experiences, the new Battlegrounds we got last season, even some of the older Battlegrounds, it's very good. Although again, you got to be careful with how quickly you can die, especially without any sort of brawn type modifier where you're getting that drastically increased health pool, right? I do think it works really well there, but the more you go towards legacy content, your more traditional strikes where they're not as arena-based, that's where I think this can start to fall off a little bit, or maybe you're not using the maximum potential of this build because a lot of this revolves around being in an arena for a very long time, being able to build up the engine, so to speak, and doing all this healing stuff. And if you're having to constantly move from section to section to section, you never really get established. You can never really get anything going. So I don't know how much I would recommend it there. For solo play, I'm not sure how much I recommend it. It's not a bad build per se, but I do think you need certain pieces of content that allow it to shine, and that is actually having some amount of ads coming in so you can do some bigger suspending rifts or bigger suspending tangles with the Wander, something like that. Well, obviously, one of the negatives is with Service of Luzaku, you have no one to heal other than your nests, which could be a benefit if you just want to be able to focus on your nests and have them create as many threadlings as you want, but you do lose some of that potency of being able to heal your teammates and keep them in the action a whole lot more as well. And for anything that doesn't have that many enemies in it, I'm looking at, like, you know, the salt mines that doesn't have that many things in there. I probably wouldn't be running with this build in there just because I think it's overkill. Like, there's just not enough stuff for you to do with this build in a certain piece of content like that. Now, in terms of the drawbacks, I kind of have been mentioning it during most of the video here, but one of the biggest drawbacks for some people might be there's too much stuff going on. There's too many things to keep track of. I gotta keep track of the healing. I gotta keep track of my rifts. I'm not using my cooldowns. I'm not using my threadlings. I'm not healing my nests. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. There's a lot of things to micromanage. There's a lot of buttons to push. There's a lot of actions per minute. If that's not your deal, if you are not going to get enjoyment out of something like that, I would probably not run this build, or I would run it in a much more muted fashion, right? I've spoken about this a lot. Any sort of a build that is like too overwhelming to run is not going to be a fun build. I don't care how good it is. It's only as good as you are able of to pilot the build, essentially. And so if you're getting overwhelmed by it, if you're not feeling you're having a lot of fun running it because there's too many things to keep track of, that is absolutely a negative. The other major negative, if you're not running with Thread of Warding in some of these higher end pieces of content, you are going to die a lot, especially outside of Lawless Frontiers, some of those higher level pieces of content. You're just incredibly fragile. The healing that you can do it's okay, but some of these enemies can just absolutely burst you down, so you have to play a lot more defensively than I feel like you might be used to in this very high-powered offense world that we're currently living in. You're very fragile. You're very fragile. You need to play defensive. You need to play back. You need to be more support-like. You are not supposed to be leading the charge here, and certain situations, like I ran a battleground heist battleground moon. You have that first open area, super rich target environment, right? There's so many things to go suspend, but it's a wide open arena. It's not this like tight corridor looking place. So being able to put yourself in a position to even get off some of those big suspensions is inherently incredibly risky. And in going for those, you might just end up dying trying to make a play. So it takes a little bit of finesse to know, like, where can I be a little more aggressive? Where do I need to sit back? And it's kind of similar to any sort of like a Vesper of Radius setup. We talked about Vesper of Radius a little while ago. Places like Fallen Saber, right, where it's a lot more tight-knit. You're in these tight corridors. There's not as much room to move around. That's where this build can really, really show its stuff compared to something like this, opening section of Heist Moon Battleground where there's too many things. Anyway, I think that is all I have on this Strand support Warlock. Again, I really, really like it. If you're tired of being a solar support Warlock, give this a try. You still have the healing capabilities, but you at least get like a little bit of utility with your anti-champion stuff. You get a little bit of damage with the threadlings, and I do think it is a lot of fun, and you don't need the artifact, right? As soon as we get a Strand-based artifact, this could go even stronger than it already is. And again, if you can make some of that Devour stuff work for you, great. But this build is a lot of fun. It's a nice blend of support and offensive power. I would highly recommend giving it a try if you're looking for something a little different. Maybe you're done with the Void, you're done with the Arc for the season, and you want to go back to Strand for a little bit. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.